Anine, hi all. Thanks for joining me again today for another read along, Gidjie and the Wolves. Yesterday, or last time, we read the chapter Animals Are Awares, and today we're going to read the chapter The Tourist and the Turtle. This place is paradise, the human in the khaki-colored hat with a dangling rope under his chin says to Gidjie. He winks at her, his cheeks a little weighted from age, but creamy and showing no sign of bug bites, yet. By the end of the weekend, he'll be full of bites and stories about giant mosquitoes and armies of wood ticks, and Gidjie thinks. You got it made, kid, he adds, giving a second wink. She hates it when people wink at her. She never knows how to interpret a wink. Carver snickers as he tends a shelf nearby. If you love it, why don't you move here? Gidjie asks. He gives a pause and then, nah, as much as I love the peace and quiet of the North Shore, the missus and I need our movie theaters and takeout food. And good beer, of course. He looks around and then shakes his head. I'd go nuts with nothing to do for too long. Nothing to do? Gidjie reiterates the statement internally. Her mind leaves the conversation. Her head begins to spin, thinking about what might happen if people who bore easily were to move to the area. She envisions parking lots and gas stations taking over the forest, the shoreline littered with trash. Am I really human? She puzzles, confused for the umpteenth time by the dramatic conflict of interest she has with most humans she meets. Nukamis is standing beside her and notices her face turning pale. She gently grabs the items Gidjie was about to pack and places them safely in a bag for the man. Thank you, ma'am, he says. How much do I owe you? Had Gidjie not spaced out, she would be excited in this moment, for her favorite part of working in the shop is the bridge building between animal and human needs. It's in these moments she truly feels a part of the intermediary culture. Let's see, 1 bottle of sunscreen and 2 wild herbal teas will be... Nukamis looks down at the piece of paper in her hand. Well, I'll let you have a look at the numbers. My eyes aren't what they used to be, she says, handing the man the piece of paper. He scratches the side of his head, pushing the cotton hat off kilter as he reads the receipt in disbelief. Animals Are Awares. Item: 1 bottle of sunscreen, 2 bottles of wild herbal tea. Price: for the sunscreen, ride a bike or walk to your destination 2 times this month instead of driving a vehicle. Carbon emissions from vehicles are contributing to ozone depletion, allowing more UVB rays to reach the Earth, resulting in the need for more sunscreen use and production. And for the tea, only purchase organic produce for the next month. Insects that are vulnerable to pesticides commonly used in non-organic farming practices pollinate many wild plants we make our teas with. Zoobug. Animals Are Awares accountant. Thank you for your business. Is this a joke? The man says, confounded. Ride a bike and only purchase organic produce for a month? He reads the slip of paper to himself again and then looks up. So, you're gonna give me the stuff if I say I'll do these things. If you do those things, the trade will be fulfilled. Do the terms seem fair? Nukamis asks. The terms of the arrangement were fairly standard, seeing how nearly everything in the Animals Are Aware shop is acquired in exchange for pledges. Oftentimes, trading for goods require pledges to rebuild or maintain animal habitats. For instance, certain bees barter honey in return for a pledge to plant so many native wildflowers near such and such location. Well, I suppose they do. He shakes his head. The missus is never going to believe this, though. He does a quick scan of his environment. for indication of where he'd really wandered into. "I've never heard of anything like this." Nukumis smiles, nodding politely at him. "Thanks again for coming in. Oh, I forgot the bread. Everyone gets bread. Baked fresh this morning." She takes a small loaf from the bread rack on the counter and adds it to his things. "How much, what do I do for the bread?" Nukumis smiles. "The bread is complimentary, a token of friendship." "Well, okay then," he says happily, picking up the bag. He leaves the shop, chuckling in disbelief. "First pledge of the day," Nukumis says, sitting down in a chair behind the counter to talk to Zubug, the shop's accountant. "And we'll be seeing more tourists every day now for the next few months. You better get your ink pads ready," she says teasingly. As far as Gidjie can tell, Zubug is both plant and animal, and then some, all in one. During business hours, Zubug sits in a pot under the countertop, creating receipts just out of sight from customers. She has extensive knowledge on all manners of trade, and Gidjie suspects that Zubug may understand every language on the planet. Between customers, she can be found listening intently to the needs of the shop's merchants, who pay her visits one by one. Understanding Zubug is another story, for she makes clicks and vibrations that Gidjie has mostly yet to decipher, apart from the basics like water and thanks. Nukumis, on the other hand, is stellar at interpreting Zubug's every sound and gesture, and brings her almost everywhere she goes, after business hours. As far as Gidjie's concerned, Zubug is her grandmother's best friend. Animals Are Awares only accepts the invention of human currency by way of the donation jar Nukumis had to put on the counter for safety reasons. A customer once got so angry that their money wasn't valued that they threw it at Gidjie and stormed out of the shop yelling profanities. So now, if a customer gets excited in a not-so-good way about the trade and pledge system, Nukumis gives a nod to the jar, and that's where they put the money. However, just because humans insist on putting money in the donation jar and walking out with an item from the shop, that doesn't mean they're off the hook for any ignored terms of the trade. Gidjie and Nukumis won't stop them from leaving, but an entire branch of intermediary culture is built to encourage accountability. Zubug creates copies of every transaction using wasp paper and smart spore ink and places them in a cedar box under the counter. When pledges are carried out satisfactorily, they simply decompose, leaving tiny mushrooms from which spores are harvested for making more ink. However, if pledges are neglected, those receipts remain intact and are collected at the beginning of the next lunar month by an enforcer. The means by which enforcers procure results are little different today than those used by the first intermediaries to hold the position. Enforcers are like trickster bounty hunters and are occasionally behind things that gremlins, ghouls, ghosts, curses, or the like are said to be responsible for. Each enforcer has a particular way they go about their enforcing, like a calling card, if you will. Gidjie's grandparents were enforcers back in the day, until they ended up with a handful of Anishinaabe kids they rescued from a burned-down boarding school. Gidjie's parents were among those who had no homes to return to, and so Nukumis and her husband started a learning camp of their own. However, after a couple of years, they were met with opposition from one of the elder councils, and the camp was disbanded. By that time, Gidjie's parents were of age and chose to continue to camp with other young adults from the boarding school. The disbanding of the school caused a disturbance between Nukumis and her husband, and they haven't lived together since. It wasn't until years later that Gidjie would come into the hands of Nukumis. These are all things Gidjie knows little about, but has had a brief rundown over the years by her aunts. Beyond this, no one will tell her what really happened to her parents, her grandfather, the other children, or why the learning camp was disbanded. Getting back to enforcers. Enforcers are nomadic by trade, and although retired, Nukamus still gets the itch to travel on occasion. Once or twice a year, they drive around in an old school bus giving educational tours. The tour bus with a twist, as Gidjie likes to call it, relies on the concerted efforts of intermediaries and animals to teach bus riders things about local natural and human history. It's not quite the same as enforcing, but the humans getting on the bus have no idea what they're in for. They leave the experience with a shift in their thinking regarding the role humans play in the landscape. And that's always fun to see. As the man in the hat begins backing down the driveway, "Ow!" Carver yelps from just out of sight. "Are you okay?" Gidjie stumbles out of her stupor and walks hurriedly towards him. "Yeah, a gungus got me again is all," he says. "I took an acorn to the eye this time." She rounds the corner to where Carver is and can't help but laugh. He's standing with one palm over his right eye, looking up at a high shelf where a tiny chipmunk is sitting, his cheeks stuffed with acorns. "I was trying to pick up one of his acorns after it fell onto a lower shelf, but he beat me to it, turned around and kicked it at me, and it hit me in the eye. Then he ran down here, picked it up, scampered back up to his bin, and now he's grinning at me with it in his cheek." Carver's still looking up angrily at Agungus, the chipmunk. He turns to Gidjie, who's covering a snicker. He realizes how ridiculous it must seem and begins to laugh. Do you ever think he'll get the hang of store and trade? How will he trade them if he can't handle anyone even touching one? "Well, he's got the storing part down at least," Gidjie says, laughing. "His acorn bin is always full." Just then, a snake courier enters the shop on a message track that runs along the floor behind the counter. It pushes the wooden beads strung along the track to spell out the code for Check Road. "Oh no, not again," Gidjie frets. "A box, Gidjie," Nukamus directs her. She hurries to the storage closet and finds a box that is small animal-sized. The three of them run down the driveway to the main road. Sure enough, there is a turtle on its back near the ditch. Nukamus kneels down and gently turns her over to see an inch-long shell crack. "We've seen worse," she says. Nukamus is right, but it's bad enough that it makes Gidjie sad, and then angry. She turns towards the SUV in the distance. The man and his missus make their way unknowingly towards their vacation spot further up the lake. She roars out loud towards them, like a tiger might, she imagines. Carver sees her in action and thinks she looks more like a tiger cub than a tigress. Even so, she's scary enough for him to not point it out. The turtle is having trouble moving her leg closest to the crack. "The box, Gidjie," Nukamus says, motioning to her. Gidjie hands her the box, dropping to her knee. "How's she doing?" "We'll get her to the sanctuary, and I'll have a better look at her," Nukamus says, lifting the turtle gently into the box. She hands her to Gidjie before picking herself up and brushing little pebbles from her knees. Carver looks into the box and shakes his head. "You're gonna be okay, friend," he tells the turtle. And that is the end of the chapter. Next time we will be reading The Sanctuary. Thank you for joining me again today as we read from Gidjie and the Wolves. I hope you will join me again next time. That'll say Gigwabamin Minawa Nagaj. I will see you again later. Miigwech.